Brian from RC Workboat Haven. Welcome to part 3 of the Gaff cutter build. In part 3, I try to do as much work as I can down below before the deck is put on. We're going to install a rudder, we're going to install the rudder servo, the bulkhead, we'll install the motor, the shaft, we're going to install a mount for the sail winch servo, which will be a temporary arrangement, I'm sure. And we'll fabricate decks, we'll fabricate hatches, and we'll also do a trial run on the bench of the components. So there's a lot of work covered in this video, and I hope you like it. Thanks for watching. I'm going to install the propeller shaft tube with epoxy. I'm going to line it up with the motor and the mount and install that. And I have put sealed roller bearings at the upper and lower end of the shaft tube, and I've drilled the lubrication hole. Propeller shaft tube just extending out about 1/8 of an inch from the keel slope. Now, to mount the motor, I've constructed 2 little cribs. These are designed to hold epoxy so it doesn't spill all over the place. And I'll be able to place my motor mount right in here and epoxy it in. So now, with the motor mount in proper alignment and the motor attached to the mount and the shaft held in place with a temporary straight coupling, I can now epoxy in the shaft tube into the hole. So I've got my left hand on the shaft tube, and I'm just going to butter it right in here. So now I'm going to try to turn it in a circle, work it on till I've got the right length here. Push the shaft in, tighten the screw on the motor. On the inside, I want to turn it so that the lubrication hole is facing up. And there it is. I have a clamp holding the bottom of the tube here to prevent it from sliding down through the hole. On the rudder shaft tube, I have also drilled a lubrication hole and installed the bearings. At the top of the rudder shaft, I've made a arm out of 1/8 inch thick aluminum, and that is flush with the top of the rudder shaft. I've designed a fairly traditional looking rudder. I've cut a couple of triangular notches out of it, and I put the line of the rudder shaft straight down, so now I can see that it's in line with the shaft. At the bottom, there'll be a flat cut across the base of the rudder, and I'll follow this shape here on the rudder shoe. I'll mark that with a pencil right now. So my next step now is to fabricate this rudder so I know exactly what position and height the arm is at the top of the rudder shaft, so that then I can proceed to install the servo. So I'll work on that next. So using the pattern and a weight, I've traced the profile of the 2 rudder sides out on a 1/8 inch basswood board. Now I'll cut these out with a knife. So I'm getting set up to glue my rudder together here. I have cling wrap on the table. I've scored the shaft on both sides with a hacksaw, and I have roughed it up slightly with a piece of sandpaper. I have a mark at either end that shows me the position. I superglued 1/8 by 1/8 strip along the leading edge of the rudder. So now I'm going to put epoxy in here and around the border, set the shaft into place, and then lay on the other side like that and put weights on it to hold it down. And here's the rudder all weighted down. This was done in the same way as in the bad weather ship build. So here I've installed the rudder. I've sanded a nice radius all around it so it's somewhat aerodynamic. I put 2 washers at the bottom and epoxied them in onto the shaft, and 1 washer at the top. And up top I've got the rudder shaft tube coming through the hole about 1/4 inch. I super glued around the base in order to hold it in position, and I've got the lubrication hole pointing inwards. So now I'm going to reinforce this shaft with some wood bracing here and epoxy that in. So in order to mount the servo for the rudder, I have to make a bulkhead. And the bulkhead has to be level so that the servo arms are at the same height. So I have a piece of aluminum flat bar that's bolted onto the arm on the rudder shaft. And on the other end, I put it through the center hole that holds the arm onto the servo. And I've screwed them both down tight. So now I've got a perfectly level surface here, and I have a bracket screwed on to the servo. So I used paper and made a pattern for the slope and the shape for this bulkhead. And now I'm going to cut it out of some wood and fit it into place. So now for an update on where we are with the build. I have the rudder installed and the rudder servo arm installed. I've made 2 flats here so that I can tighten go down with these 2 bolts onto the rudder shaft. I have the rudder servo installed and I have the servo rod connected. The electronics pod is wood glued onto the rudder servo bulkhead. I have all of these parts epoxied at the base onto the gel coat. And then port and starboard, I've got the battery boxes installed. I decided that I wanted my sail winch to be central, and I thought I'd take advantage of the deck shelf. So using oak and pine, I've bolted on the sail servo, and I've made a bracket here that can go through the hatch and then turn, and it will be held on with 4 bolts. If I had to, I could reach in and remove these 4 bolts and then take out the whole servo assembly here, or I could just remove the servo easily. So this is the present state of the build. I have left out the details of construction on some of these items, but I have covered them in previous build videos. So next, let's hook up the batteries and electronics and just give this arrangement a trial run on the bench. So now we're all wired up here. Using my Dumbork transmitter, I turn it on here. Got batteries. And switch on the boat. Pull the trigger. Forward, reverse, starboard, port. On the receiver, in the spot called number 6, I've got the servo here for the sails, and I can operate that from this knob on the top. And I've been practicing pushing this with my thumb, which I can do just like that. Press the trigger and look, all 3 of them on the go. That ought to keep my hands full. Anyway, that's the way it's going to operate, and it's just going to take some practice, but it looks like it's going to be fun. And outside the boat astern, we've got rudder. About 45 degrees maximum. Forward. Reverse. Always switch off the boat first, then switch off the transmitter. Next step, let's work on the deck. I've cut out a heavy paper profile of the deck. I'm going to use this pattern also to help design the scuppers and other features on the deck. So it's nice to have that. And this I'll use to trace out the shape on a piece of basswood. The basswood boards that I'm using measure 4 inches by 24 inches. So I'm going to have to glue a number of pieces together in order to get a piece large enough for this deck. These two side pieces have already been glued together to make one long strip. I angled the ends to make the glue joint stronger. So now I've taped everything in position here, and I'm going to glue this together. Now the way I do this is I get masking tape and I run it all the way along the seam. Then I turn the board over, bend the piece, and then put wood glue into the seam. And I'll just turn this one around here. Now I'll do the centerpiece. There, and I'll do the other side. Now I'll take this over and lay it on a flat surface and clean off the excess glue. Now this cutter always was a video about an experimental build, and there's a good chance I might have to completely rethink the sail winch servo. So in the pattern I've cut a large hatch and a smaller hatch forward of the mast, so that if I do have to modify the winch, for example, I can get my hand in here and it's going to be much easier to work. So now I'll use this pattern and cut out the deck. So here's the basswood board, and I've already cut out the perimeter of the board here. And by setting the pattern on, I can trace here and cut out these two sections. And I will save those two pieces because I can use those for the tops of the hatches. Now this is one of the reasons that I went to all the trouble of making a large board out of small pieces of basswood, because it's worth it. I'm able to do all of this work with a knife accurately. It's just beautiful wood to work with. So I've set the deck in place, and I've put weights on here to make sure that I've got enough available to press the basswood down so there's no gaps. So I'll remove the weights, add glue, and then place the deck back on. Then weight it down. So now I've got the deck glued on here. There's a little bit of a ridge all the way around the perimeter that I have to sand off. This area right here. Working on the hatches and the deck is going to create quite a bit of dust. So I don't want that to get in my motor and into the loopholes and so on. So I'm going to remove the rudder, and I'm going to remove the propeller shaft and the motor, just to keep them out of harm's way. The servos, I don't think that they're going to be absorbing too much dust. I put masking tape over the lube hole and the bearing to keep the dust out, and I've done the same over here on the rudder shaft tube. I put tape over the propeller shaft tube bearing and the rudder shaft bearing. So now we're ready to get into some serious sanding. So now I've sanded all the way around the outside. I can now make sure that the cutout for the hatch is even by using this little instrument here. And I can run it down and make a line. I checked all the way around on all of them, and the only problem is right in here. So I'll sand that off. Then I have an equal distance. Now before I work on the hatch combing here, I want to reinforce 3 areas. Up here, under the bowsprit, in the mast step area, and astern here. For that, I'll be using this cedar, which I've used for many other things. It's easy to cut, easy to glue, and very strong and light. Put a mark on one side, flip it over, now I'll cut these 2 pieces. I've got it right out to the end, and I know that this stick is just lying to one side of the center line. So I'll make a mark here, and I will cut it off. So now I know this stick will fit right in here. I'll slide it in to the end, put a small clamp on it, and get the other piece, slide it in, and make a mark. So there's 2 pieces cut and in place. Now I'll cut some pieces that go in this direction and then temporarily clamp them in position and do the stern, and then do the gluing all at once. So here's the forward reinforcement that I've done. I have 1 layer of cedar running this way, and then filler pieces here, and then a double layer in this section. And I've got 2 braces, starboard and port, that come up on an angle to support the mast step. Bottom of that angle is in the corner of the deck shelf. I'll be gluing these strips onto the underside of the deck opening. That'll bring the total thickness to 1/4 of an inch, which will make the sides a lot stronger. And I've done the same up here. So I have cleaned up this glued area here on the hatch openings. And I'm going to get some 1/8 inch basswood and set it right here. And get a line. And that's a pretty good fit. So I'm going to set my curve tool here, and I'll make a mark at 1 inch. And that's a pretty good fit. So now I'll take the same curve, make sure it fits properly, and then mark it and cut it. I plan to glue in the 4 end pieces first. In each of these 4 corners, I'm going to glue a small ledge of 1/16 thick material, and that will hold everything in the vertical position once the glue is applied. And here are those little shelves that I've put in here. So now when I'm installing these sides, I can concentrate on getting the curve here nice and tight and not have to worry about the height. So now I have the 4 hatch ends resting on the little shelf blocks I've made, and I put some tape on my square weights. So now I can glue these in, and they're fairly close to perpendicular from the deck. So now with the end pieces fixed in position, I can cut the 2 side pieces and fit it in here with the ends supported by that little shelf, press it in and glue it. So I have the hatch sides here pressed into the curve with a few sticks. I'm using a piece of metal 3/4 of an inch wide, and I'm just sliding it along the deck to make sure I don't have any high spots. Well, this is a fairly long run. Although it's 1/8 of an inch thick, I still want to beef it up slightly. So I've got some 1/8 by 3/16 basswood strips, and I'm going to glue that just on the inside right in here, and I think that that'll strengthen it up quite a bit. I'll feel better about that. I want to expand the size of the hatch so that it will sit on top of the hatch sides here. So I've got scrap pieces of wood, and I have taped them on here and here like this, and I'm going to glue them together. I'm using the same method. Now to do the end piece, I'll just add a bit of tape right here so it doesn't come out. And now bend this one over and glue it. And I'll set this on a flat surface and clean off the excess glue. Next, I'm going to use my 3/4 inch steel guide and do a final cleanup around the top. I'll also smooth off the corners in here. Get it all ready to make the hatch. So now to make the sides of the hatch, I've clamped on a piece of 1/8 basswood, and I'm going to just make a mark. And I'll cut that line. So we have a good fit, and I'm marking the board at 7/8 of an inch. Now I'm clamping the 2 sides together here, and I'm going along the top and making sure that the top of the curve here is the same on both sides. And that looks pretty good, top and bottom. I've also cut some flat strips that are 7/8 of an inch wide, and they will fit on the ends of the hatches and the forward hatch. I will be clamping the 7/8 sides onto the hatch opening, but I want my hatch to be 1/16 of an inch larger so there's no problem fitting it. So on 2 sides of the opening, I've packed it out with 1/16 basswood, and I'll now fit these pieces into place and clamp them all together. I'll cut these end pieces off properly after I've glued the top of the hatch on. Now I'm going to super glue these pieces together. Now the forward hatch is almost flat, so I'll be able to put this top on here and just put a few weights on it, and that will hold it. There's a lot of curve here to the shear line, and I didn't want my hatch to flatten out if I stressed this board in too tightly. So what I did was I made some cuts cross-grained here, and there's probably about a 1/16 of an inch of material. And what that's done is it's relieved stress here, and I can now glue this down, and I know that it won't try to spring out flat when I remove the hatch. So now I'm ready to glue. And here are the hatch tops glued and weighted down. So the hatches were easy to remove from that tape. I've cleaned up around the sides here, so everything is nice and smooth. The distance to the top here from the deck is 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to set the hatch back on, and I've got a spacer that's just the right thickness. I'm going to go along here with my pencil and make a line, and that will bring the hatch down to just the right distance above the deck. I should be able to do that cut with a knife and sandpaper, so it won't take too long. So now I've got a fairly good fit all the way along the bottom of the hatches. Almost an airtight fit. And this brings us to the end of part 3 of the pilot cutter build. I plan to continue with the build and eventually sail this boat. There will be a lot of experimentation ahead. Feel free to like and comment, and you're also welcome to subscribe. Don't miss part 4. Thanks for watching.